All right, folks, the 10 best cards in the history of Hearthstone, and the three behind me aren't even on the list.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right. We're talking about the best cards ever. Over 1,500 of you voted on your top cards. I compiled the results, ranked them based on how many of you said they were the best card of all time. And yeah, Keleseth, Reno, Rexar, not even good enough to make the top 10. So let's go ahead and jump into it with our number 10 card here. It's actually Jade Idol. Now, I actually think Keleseth and probably Reno belong ahead of Jade Idol here on the list, but you can't begrudge Jade Idol getting a spot. It is, in my opinion, one of the most oppressively designed cards ever in Hearthstone. I would name this one of my worst designed Hearthstone cards. We have some future videos coming on that topic. But as far as power level is concerned, like, yes, this was definitely a good card. Jade Druid was a really meta-relevant deck, and it did feel like Jade Idol was part of that in-game win condition where it just got to go infinite. It never got fatigued. It kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, man. And that basically removed an entire archetype from Hearthstone. Control decks just couldn't beat the value train of Jade Idols. It would just eventually overwhelm them. You know, Skulking Geist came along to help solve the problem. Was still kind of awkward, but for a while there, Jade Idol did reign supreme. I don't think it was quite as meta influential as other things like Keleseth, which was played across like a variety of classes for a longer time period. But nonetheless, Jade Idol is a really annoying card and a really, really good one. At the number 9 spot here, we have Blood Reaver Guldan, and as one user put it, 10 mana, you may concede now. And indeed, that's really how it felt when Blood Reaver Guldan was played, because not only does he summon like this giant board of Void Lords and a Mal'Ganis and who knows what else, but also his hero power was really, really good at dominating the late game, because it provided inevitable damage, dealing 3 damage per turn, you know, better than a base Hunter hero power, for instance, as far as like ending the game. Also, it heals you with that lifesteal aspect. So it was really hard for opponents to get any upper ground on Guldan when that hero power could keep churning out such a big swing every turn. Basically a 6 health difference between the heroes that added up very, very quickly. It only took usually 4 or 5 turns for the hero power alone to whittle down the opponent and really start to end the game. And that's if the giant board of demons didn't do it in the first place, right? So this is still very prominently played in Wild. It's a successful card to this day. And the fact that it's only number 9 on this list is probably one of the best hero cards ever tells you a lot about the quality of cards here. Like this little fella, Patches the Pirate here at the number 8 spot. And indeed, I included the version with Charge here, the pre-nerf version, because that's really the one that was so darn dominant, making things like Pirate Warrior absolutely ridiculous, but not being limited to Pirate Warrior, right? Also showing up at things like even a Token Druid back in the day, where you just get that really wide early board and overwhelm your opponents. And some people still look at this card and wonder, like, what made it so good? It's a little bit hard to explain because it is just a 1/1 at the end of the day, but it's a free 1/1. It's some extra little chip damage, and it also thins out your deck a little bit, making sure you have slightly higher quality draws. And, you know, 1/1 in stats in the early game, you can't scoff at that because it might get 3 or 4 damage early because they just never can quite kill it. It might help you take a really early trade to preserve a future threat. It has other pirate synergies, getting buffed by things like South Sea Captain. So ultimately, it just added up to a lot of additional pressure in those early game turns that are so crucial and so pivotal at deciding exactly how a game is going to unfold. So now let's move to the other side of things. Patch is a meager 1 mana 1/1, and then we've got Ultimate Infestation, which is basically every effect in the universe in a single card. I remember when this was revealed, we were like, how can one card do so many things? And, you know, I'll be honest, to today's standards, I don't know that Ultimate Infestation would stand on all that much. We have some pretty crazy cards doing much faster, higher tempo things, winning games way more decisively. Think about like all the different Galakrons. So Ultimate Infestation probably wouldn't hold up to today. I think it'd still be played, particularly in a Kael'thas world. It would make its way into standard, but it wouldn't feel like that totally oppressive, just completely overpowered card that it felt like back in the day. And one viewer here left a good comment, I thought, reminding us of Tom60229 becoming a world champion because he kept the 10 mana card Ultimate Infestation in his mulligan, which was really hotly debated among pro players and among casters at the time. But it was so good that he decided it was worth it to keep it in his opening hand, and it really ended up being pretty decisive in his victory. Now, that might have been results oriented thinking, but the mere fact that it was a possibility and it was debatable tells you just how strong of a card it was. 10 mana in the opening hand for a non like win condition card. It's not a big combo piece or something like that. It's just so much raw value, so much card draw that it made sense. And that really helps capture why this card was so good. So moving on here, let's take a look at Baku, who didn't even make the top 5. But for me, I think Baku's probably in my top 3 spots. I think Baku was one of the most meta-defining cards that we've ever had. This effect was just ridiculous. Odd decks were so strong, even today in wild format, like this comment shares. Baku's still meta-defining, even when you consider everything that's possible in wild format. It turns out, taking a hero power, something that's so universal to Hearthstone, so core to the experience, and making it better means that you get basically not just more value out of each time you hit the button, but every card becomes a little bit more valuable too, because you can use your mana to use an upgraded hero power instead of having to spend your mana on cards. So you can stretch resources farther. You can do more in any given turn without playing from hand. So Baku just makes decks really, really good, both in standard and in wild. So good that he had to be rotated a year early, something which people thought was like impossible at the time. But him and Gen just proved too powerful. Now, you might say, wait a minute, where's Gen on this list? Like, shouldn't Gen be on here as well? I think, debatably, yeah, Gen should probably also be a top 10 card. But I do think Baku stood out over Gen. I think there were more powerful odd decks and remain more powerful odd decks than even decks, despite both of them being so influential and good. I might put Gen like 8 or 9, put Baku top 3 or 4. Gen's not going to be on the list, spoiler alert, but I'm glad at least one of the two was captured here, because Baku is definitely a very, very good card. So next up here we have Undertaker. Oh no, wait. Undertaker. You may not even remember this card, and it's really not even this version of Undertaker. It's really this version of Undertaker, the original Undertaker that gained +1/+1 every time you played a Death Rattle minion. Frankly, this is another card I'd probably put in my top 3. Undertaker was absolutely broken. He was the first deck/card I played to Legend way back in the day. That's how good he was. Not that I can't hit Legend, but the fact that I did it much earlier than I otherwise probably would have, thanks to this card, particularly Undertaker Hunter, with things like web spinners and haunted creepers, could just curve out so ridiculous. This guy would often be like a 4/5 on turn 3 or 4 and would keep scaling. As somebody here puts it, if you were happy siphon souling a 1 mana card, that's a sign of a problem. But like sometimes you had to use ridiculous removal to kill it. Same story. Sometimes you got to BGH it, big game hunter on a 1-drop, and that's like the only way you're gonna stay alive and stay in a game. That's ridiculous. But it really showcases just how much this card could scale. You played 2 of them on turn 1. It was like way better than something like a Battle Fiend and Demon Hunter. It just went absolutely nuts. Way better than Mana Worm, other cards that were really defining 1-drops of their era. This put those to shame and certainly deserves a spot on this list. Arguably, you could say the number 1 or 2 spot, because Blizzard has said in the past that Undertaker Hunter has had the highest win rate of any deck in the history of Hearthstone, and that was completely defined by this single card. So now moving on to the number 4 spot, we've got Zephyrus the Great. I don't think there's really any surprise here. Ever since Zephyrus has jumped into the game in the last year or so, he's been defining decks. Highlander's been really, really good, and I think Zephyrus has been an even better Highlander card than things like Reno or Kazakus of old, because he really does give you that perfect card, making him that ultimate in a pinch answer. He's lethal damage. He's a board clear. He's just a great on-curve play sometimes as well to make sure you have those vital early turns. And, that ultimate flexibility makes Zephyrus really, really good in so many different decks. Aggressive Highlander decks, control Highlander decks, non-Highlander decks that just draw a lot of cards. Zephyrus finds his way into so many different things. So yeah, surprise twisting nethers are amazing. Apparently Zephyrus is so good, one viewer here managed to buy 50 packs despite being free to play just to get a Zephyrus. That's pretty powerful when he makes you dump a ton of money into Hearthstone. Uh, Sadly, you kind of have to keep up because Highlander decks are expensive, but that's how it works. Zephyrus is really, really, really good. And now in our third place spot, it's Shutterwalk. Yeah, we got some claws, some jaws. Hopefully, this background image behind Shutterwalk captures that day one Shutterwalk experience. You guys are gonna have some PTSD reliving those moments if you were there for early Witchwood. Yeah, Shutterwalk completely ruined like the first 3 days of the Witchwood expansion, in my opinion. He was absolutely broken, completely stupid. Now, in hindsight, if I'm being like totally honest, Shutterwalk's been a great card, but I don't think he was ever completely meta warping. If you realistically look back at the data, often Shutterwalk Shaman was not like the, ultimate tier 1 best deck in the game. He really got outshadowed by Baku and Gin decks in many cases. Odd and even decks were stronger on average. If you think back, like Odd Paladin always had the same cycle as Shutterwalk and was always more powerful. So I don't really think I would have put Shutterwalk certainly in the top 3. I'm not even sure he would have made my top 10. I'm not saying he's a bad card. Obviously, he's been crazy, incredible, has been super powerful across multiple metas. He's been a high tier card. But when you're talking about the 10 best ever, that's really tough competition. And Shutterwalk's maybe in my like top 15, maybe not in my top 10. I'm sure I'll hear some debates about that because I will say this is a very visible card in its power level. You really remember the times it beat you. I mean, from a pure data standpoint, it's hard to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture of Shutterwalk because, God, we all lived those moments and man, it sucks. And man, it feels like Shutterwalk really is one of the most dominant cards of all time. So I'm not surprised necessarily to see him on the list. It's just, I may not have put him this high myself. But yeah, he's got some jaws and he's got some claws. Moving on to number 2 here, it's Leroy Jenkins. We miss him, but we don't. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's got some chicken there with him. I included the 5-mana version here of Leroy just because he's been 5 mana for so long and was still one of the best cards in the game at 5 mana. You could also certainly include the 4-mana version here, which was definitely even better way back in the day, particularly in things like Miracle Rogue, Shadow Stepping Leroy's for insane burst damage. But really, Leroy's just been that ultimate finisher for every aggro deck ever in Hearthstone, it seems like. And when a card is that synonymous with the game, just absolutely everywhere, completely pervasive card like that, yeah, you have to say he's ridiculously powerful and super consistent and very, very good. Now, depending on how you define powerful, like Leroy's doesn't have the most like individually decisive deck building kind of component. Like Baku, you build decks around. Shutterwalk, you build decks around. Leroy isn't something you like structure your deck around. You just toss him in. So he doesn't have the same like, peak as some of these other cards, but man, his floor is so much higher than everything else because he's in absolutely every single deck. So yeah, I absolutely think Leroy's a great fit here. He's one of the cards I was recommending is the best legendary to craft for like 3 years running. And he would probably be in my top 3 or 4 spots as well. So great fit for Leroy. And then finally here, we have Unity, Precision, Perfection. It's Zillix at the number 1 spot. And the same argument I just used for Leroy, where Zillix doesn't have that crazy ceiling, that crazy peak, where you build your whole deck around him and he's your game-winning card. It doesn't matter because of any card in the history of Hearthstone, Zillix certainly has the highest floor. He is in like 55% plus of decks in his era. So for that 2 years or year and a half he's in the game, more than half of decks ran him. And I've never seen a card reach played percentages as high as Zillix. Even back in the day, like Bone Mares and Kelliseths and even Leroy's, those cards usually hit like 35, 45%. Zillix was like 55, 60%. That's absolutely bonkers. He doesn't feel broken. He doesn't feel like the most powerful card, but he's certainly the most consistent, the most reliable, the most trustworthy, and the most played card in his era as well. And that's just because he does darn near everything, right? He's a little bit of defense. He's some removal. He's some healing. He can be pressure in a magnetic deck where he's pushing extra damage. He's value trades with that divine shield. So basically Ziliax did it all, and that means he could fit into any given deck. Aggro decks even played him. Certainly control decks played him. He had a big mech push for a long time too. So yeah, Ziliax, is he the best card in the history of Hearthstone? Feels kind of weird, right? Like sometimes I think things like Baku or Zephyrus or even Leroy probably belong ahead of him just because they feel more decisive. They feel more game winning. But you certainly can't argue that Ziliax deserves a spot up here somewhere. And you know what? It might as well be first. And there you go, folks. That's it. Those are the 10 best cards in the history of Hearthstone, according to you guys. I think my top three, I'm not willing to rank them, but it'd probably be Baku, Leroy, maybe Zephyrus, maybe Ziliax would make that top three for me as well. But I want to hear your thoughts. What cards do you think were absolutely insane to include on this list? Like, why were they there? What were they thinking? What cards were missing? Like, did Reno have to be here? Did Keleseth have to be on this list? Certainly want to hear those thoughts as well. So leave all those in the comments down below. Excited to see what you all have to say. But until then, thanks much for watching. And until next time, game on.